By now, we've all heard of Bitcoin and perhaps even blockchain. What are those things, right? What really is Bitcoin? And are there actually legitimate businesses and people out there using it? Those were the questions I had for today's guest, Jeremy Almond, the CEO of Paystand. Jeremy and I have a fascinating discussion about the banking system, what Bitcoin is, how you use it, and mostly about his company that helps thousands of businesses, big businesses all across the planet, make all of their payments using Bitcoin. Fascinating. If you have any interest in this stuff about our banking system, what the future is going to look like, how Bitcoin fits in, I think you're going to enjoy this one. Boundary Breakers is brought to you by Carter & Clark. Well, Jeremy, thanks so much for taking time out of your day. I really, really appreciate it. Just for the audience, could you just give us a little bit of background in terms of sort of where you grew up, where you're from, what family life was like? Just let us know about your sort of your early days.
Well, just thanks for having me on, Brandon. Super cool, man. What an honor. It's an honor to even think about that and be on a conversation with you, because I think my most likely life direction, I should be working in the field or something right now. I somehow got this crazy product of the American dream, which is like crazy that it still exists. But, my father on one side, he was this blue collar construction worker who never went to college, never finished high school. One of the guys that you see swinging a nail out in front of Home Depot or whatever. And, he married my mother, and my mother's side of the family comes from Mexico, and they came over the border and kind of went through the immigrant journey and, worked in the fields and that sort of thing, and worked in the mines. So, between my blue collar construction working American dad who'd been, here for generations, and then immigrant mother, I think product of families like that, you really are grateful for what it's like to live in a country where you actually, can have upward mobility. Because that's not true in most sections of humanity. And thousands of years, you were going to be the blacksmith your parents were. You're going to work in the same fields your parents were. And so they have the opportunity to sort of chart a different path and watch your parents sacrifice a lot. I think that is such a unique point in time in our culture, where kind of the dream of things like Silicon Valley can exist, the dream of upward mobility can exist, the dream of sort of transformational and economic change can exist by just simply hard work and maybe a couple lucky breaks, so to speak. And so I never would have expected to be a technology CEO of a company that employs hundreds and hundreds of people around the planet and affects thousands and thousands of people and millions of businesses. How lucky am I? It's crazy.
Yeah, I love it. Well, so where did you grow up?
So as a product of a family like that, I move around a lot, and so we kind of moved around a lot with kind of migrant type work. And but I spent the most time in a kind of blue collar immigrant town called Stockton, which is kind of an old shipping town. And it's I would say people say I grew up in the ghetto. I don't know if I'd call it the ghetto or whatever, but it definitely wasn't silver spoon for sure. And so I think like for me, nowadays, I spend my time with Silicon Valley and Wall Street and to some degree in DC and policymaking. Seeing how towns and people like that grew up, my heart is for people who are struggling to live day by day, to swing a hammer, to work hard, and just remind people that just because you started in one place doesn't mean that's where you end up. That's not the story. That's the beginning. So I think I had a few lucky breaks. Most of the people I grew up with either were in jail, or never left or whatever. And so I think I was one of the few people that got out of the neighborhood I did, and what a blessing.
That's great. No, I love it. Well, so do you recall at what point did you, well, look, let me say this. Every entrepreneur that I talk with, or everybody that's in your shoe, every individual that's in your shoes that has done extraordinary things
Ooh.
has a fire within them, right? And it is it's a double edged sword because it's a blessing because without it, wouldn't get there. But it could also be sort of torturing. Do you remember how old you were when you sort of felt this that you wanted to do something more, or you wanted to make
Yeah,
a
I mean,
change?
you certainly don't know what you're going to spend your career, and it takes a long time to find your calling, right? Like calling is this amazing thing that, like, when you take your professional career and your skills and then you match them with the things that like are this fire inside, like, man, you can move mountains. It's amazing. Um, but I think, yeah, adversity and pain like just drives, it either drives you to massive growth, right, or it drives you out. And so I think, like, for me, I think I took a lot of adversity growing up, and I just looked and said, wow, I've got an opportunity, right? So I had two things. I think I had a really rough growing up, and at the same time I had parents who believed in me, and like those two things put together allow you to kind of speak truth to where you can be, not where you are. And so I think from an early age, I was both, academically always getting pushed. Ended up, I think one of the first lucky breaks I got was, I was part of this charter bus schooling program, back in the 80s, where they took kids who kind of grew up in the ghetto and they tested them, these troublemaker kids. And what they found out was oftentimes some of the troublemaker kids, maybe had a decent intellect and actually needed to like put it to somewhere. And so, I ended up taking this test, and they said, "Hey, we need to put you in a different kind of school." And so, in high school, I got bused like an hour and a half in each direction every day, to kind of a better school and kind of a rich kid neighborhood, and that opened me up kind of first to see bigger opportunities. And even that for me was like a big driver because I was kind of the only one of the few kids that was, from the neighborhood I grew up, that was in a different quality of school. And so being in, AP courses and calculus courses and things like that, and looking not like everybody else and not having the kind of history and background as everybody else, you both realize your difference, and then you realize the difference is a superpower. So
Amen. I love that. I love that. Now, that's interesting. So that was obviously impactful. You call it a lucky break. I'm not sure. Maybe a little bit of luck involved, but certainly, I love the humility. By the way, but so you ended up at Cal, and then also got an MBA from
yeah, from
UMass, right?
Amherst. Yeah, so kind of a crazy story. So I guess how I got involved in tech, which is its own kind of crazy story. So I was going to that high school, and I had, this is in the late 80s, and then the 90s, but tech was kind of blowing up, and so, which was cool, and so I was still getting in trouble in that high school, and so I actually got, kind of put in after school to keep me out of trouble. And one of the teachers realized, like, hey, we got to put this kid to work. And I didn't, computers were really expensive back then, so we didn't have one of those in the house. And so the guy said, hey, we have one of these broken computers. If you fix it, you can like keep it. And I thought, oh, okay, cool, challenge accepted or whatever. And then I got really interested in it and being a little bit of a troublemaker. What I found was, like, back then in the 90s, there was like you could like hack telephone lines, which was really cool, I thought. And so, like, I found a new way to get in trouble, but it was a little bit more blue collar, or I mean white collar. So anyway, so I started learning a program, and I think I was 14 or 15 at that point. And so by 16, I was the only one, probably the only kid who could code in my school. And so I ended up getting kind of some scholarships to go to Cal and Stanford. And actually, so that's where I thought I was going to go, because my parents were like, "Whoa, this is your big break to get into tech." It's like, the .com days were blowing up at that point. Um, and, uh, and so I went to visit actually Cal, and I was like, "Oh, these kids are kind of hippie kids. Like, I don't know if I fit in here." And then I went to check Stanford, which is a great school, but and I've done some work with them afterwards. But I was like, "Oh, these are a bunch of rich kids. Like, I don't know what to do with that." So I was going to go to my backup school at UCLA, and I was on the way, and my dad was taking me to check out schools, and we stopped in Santa Barbara, and there's an engineering school there, and we went to have uh, um, basically lunch there. And on the engineering campus sits like on the beach in front of a surf spot. And I remember, so I'm like, I don't even know if I was 16 at the time, 15 maybe. And I remember like going, none of these environments are environments I grew up in, but looking around at like these cool surfer guys and like, these, 16-year-old boy, right? So, and the girls that are on the beach, it's like, this is a new landscape I could get into. Now my dad was like, he was, not educated, but he was street smart. And so, he was like, oh, this is not good. Like my kid's not going to go to like the school he probably should go to or whatever. And so he goes, I go, Dad, we don't need to go anywhere else. Like, cancel the program to Cal, cancel the trip to UCLA. Like, it's here. And he goes, well, I hear you. But since, we have no money, so you're gonna have to kind of pay your way through school. So like, yeah, you got scholarships and whatever, but you still got to eat and all that stuff. And so he goes, you're gonna have to get a job. And if you're, going to the Bay Area, you're probably gonna get a job at one of these cool tech companies or whatever. And he said, so what are you going to do if you're out in this like beach town? There's no tech here. I said, okay, challenge accepted. So back then there were the yellow pages. And so what I did was I looked up in the yellow pages and there were 2 tech companies actually in the small little beach town in Santa Barbara. And I cold called both of them and I said, hey, here's the deal. Like, I want to talk to CEO, imagine a 16-year-old precocious kid. I want to talk to CEO. And, secretary's like, no, no, no. And I just kept calling for a few weeks. And finally, the secretary let me talk to CEO, one of them. I said, hey, here's the deal. I like really want to be here. And I can only be here if I get a job with you guys. So here's the deal. Like, I'm moderately, like, I'm going to go, I got like a full ride for engineering school or whatever. And I know how to program, but like, I will like sweep your floors. I'll take out your trash. All you need to do is give me a job offer for $1, like $1 a year, and I'm good. And like I can get my dad satisfied, and then I'm like off to the races. And so I think the CEO didn't know quite what to do with that, so he ended up giving me a job offer, and that was kind of my entry into tech. And that tech company, ended up growing like crazy and getting acquired, and then going public, and it was a kind of life journey. So
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Is that
yeah, so
digital
digital
instruments?
instruments became kind of the most at that point. It's actually one of the cool things that I also learned is like one big successful company can actually like, transform a town. So like there was no tech in that town, and then that happened, and like you created 300 probably tech CEOs that have kind of spun out of that, and a Vico that acquired
Hmm.
that company.
Was it a
Yeah, so we
hardware
build
company?
nanotech equipment. So all of the equipment that now, like the semiconductors and the infrastructure that goes in, things like iPhones and computers have been shrunk down to the palm of your hand, originally had to get built with sort of the equipment that the founder invented. So it was a very highly technical company. It was really cool to watch what a highly technical, sort of industry changing company that's sort of under the radar. I mean, it's on the NASDAQ today, the parent company. Nobody's ever heard of it. And, I love these big, sort of economically transformational companies that, are a little bit under the radar. So,
Right. Right. Like it's just
yeah,
not
yeah.
consumer facing, I suppose. You've done a lot of stuff since then, sort of in the world of technology. How did Tell us the story of Paystand and sort of how it came to be and how you
Mm.
got there.
Yeah, I definitely didn't think, I didn't think I'd like spend what I'd consider like the peak arc of my career, building a B2B payment company, which is kind of at its core what Paystand is. Um, it's either because I was either going to be in the fields or maybe if I was lucky, work at like NASA. That sounded cool. Like B2B payments, like, well, how do you get there? But in a way, this has been like this crazy 15-year process to find my calling. So what happened was, if you fast forward after that first tech company we're talking about, I think parents have 2 main things that they want to see, maybe in their hope for the next generation, for their kids, for the American dream. One, you want to see your kids do better than yourself, right? And so I think I was
Mhm.
lucky to be off to the races to do that. And then second, like, how do you grow? Most people grow their wealth and grow upward mobility effectively through buying a home. Like that's kind of the core thing of the American dream. And so my dad swung a nail, swung a hammer for 20 years to effectively buy an 800 square foot house. And that was kind of their nest egg. And so I go off to college, I get involved in tech. Fast forward 15 years, and they're really proud. It's a humble, success, but it's a cool success. Um, and anyway, so what happened was, in 2008, I was in New York. I was kind of working in Wall Street. My life had changed, dramatically. Um, and through some tragedy that happened in the family, it's a kind of long, sad story, but my parents lost that house that they had kind of worked their whole life for.
Mm.
And they were one of many millions of Americans who lost their home in 2008 during the financial crisis. And I had this really visceral moment where I was walking downtown New York and Wall Street, and there was this thing called the Occupy Wall Street movement, which was a bunch of people who were really, really upset and protesting that it felt really wrong that Wall Street was bailed out and Main Street wasn't, and you had millions of Americans who were really hurting. And it kind of exposed a sort of structural imbalance and this what I'd call corruption in financial services. And so I just remember I was literally in a suit and I was like, who am I? Am I like, the product of, now, the power structure in Wall Street and financial services, or am I the rebellious kid that grew up with, a family from nothing? And so, I what so there's a part of me that's like, I'm going to pick up a rock and throw it at the bank too. And I think
Yeah.
my view as technologists, one of the magic things we get to be is we get to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be. And I think in some ways, technology is this force for change that ultimately it can be a quiet revolution. And so I went back to grad school and I did my master's thesis on why banks were too big to fail, and kind of studied under some folks that did a lot of the hearings back then. And out of that, I kind of grew this thesis around, sort of the structural inequity in financial services and commercial banking. And this was right around the time that there was this white paper by this kind of pseudonymous guy named Satoshi Nakamoto that released something called Bitcoin. And so what I saw was the answer to a problem that many of us felt but couldn't articulate, which is if financial services, if the money, which is the core of how our economy works, and if we don't have a working, fair economy, we don't have a fair system. If you could fix the money, you could maybe fix the world. And so I've kind of dedicated the last 15 years of my life to um, be a part of that force for change. And today, Paystand is, one of the largest commercial use cases and a fairly successful company in that space. So
Yeah. No, I love that. I can imagine sort of that, you know, almost like a identity crisis almost where, it's Wall Street versus Main Street. Your American dream at that time or your pursuit thereof found you on Wall Street, but yet your parents were suffering on Main Street. And it's like, wait a minute, who am I? And that's a really, that's a really um, fascinating sort of impetus for, like you said, fixing the corruption in the financial system. So for those who aren't as familiar with the particulars of the financial system, why banks would be too big to fail, without getting into like a master's thesis, what was it about the sort of infrastructure that the big banks were all plugged into that you felt was wrong or corrupt? And then what exactly sort of is it that you were trying to eliminate or
yeah,
solve?
I think one of the things is like structural power tends to, eat and accumulate to get larger and larger and larger, and the systems in general tend to um, uh, get larger and more monopolistic over time. And this is especially true with both political systems and money, because they're the two kind of core power bases. And so over time, what you find is, you know, in almost every country, and this was true in the US, but especially true in other countries, you end up with 2 or 3 or 4, major financial institutions that control 80 or 90% kind of all the economic activity. And they wield enormous power. And it's not that any one person is terribly corrupt. There are bad actors, but what happens is, it's almost like a political system where, like in many ancient days, over time when you had kings and queens, you could have good kings, but eventually when the monarchy controls so much power, um, one bad actor can completely, whether it's through corruption or greed, can leave people out, can leave people behind. And so this is what happens in the financial system. And so, you have um, hundreds of millions of people just in North America alone, that are kind of left out of the financial system. You have structural inequity. You have cases like, the Visa and MasterCard, which own an entire sort of duopoly on all sort of economic transactions in the world. And so you effectively have 10 financial institutions that control most of the world's economy. Um, and so that's fine if you're at the top. It works pretty well. Like most Americans are like, I go into Starbucks, I swipe my card and it's fine. Um, but it's not fine, when something happens. So whether it's the financial crisis of 2008 and you find a structural problem, and then basically everything was built off of kind of a house of cards and people lose their homes. Or, a couple of years ago, Silicon Valley Bank and a bunch of other banks failed, right? And that was sort of some structural problems. And so literally people who thought money's sitting in a bank, actually money's not sitting in a bank. They're loaning it out.
Right.
That's not good. Or you're in global places where I spend a lot of my time today. And the reality is, the banking and payment system works for 1 billion people, but the other 6 billion people like have no access whatsoever. And their money, their actual
Right.
storage of their money gets um, so expensive that they actually can't save any money. And if you can't save any money, then you're effectively in a state of slavery. So because why? Because if you have 10% inflation, over the course of 10 years, like your money is basically inflated to nothing. Um, so how can you
Mhm.
actually ever, increase up the economic ladder? And so these sort of structural problems aren't any one person's fault, but they're a little bit like, the government pre-democracy. And so my view is what Bitcoin and this thing called blockchain was this sort of technology breakthrough that enabled democratizing our financial infrastructure in a way where there's no owner. And if there's no owner, then there's far less likely to be corruption. So, our democratic system, politically is highly imperfect, but it's probably better than a dictatorship. And so in that sense, what we said is it's probably better to not have money dictators. It's probably better to have, many actors who can be involved and participate in the system. And if you open that system up, then you can open access up to not 1 billion people or not 1%, but 7 or 8 billion people. And you can actually build goods and services that work for everybody, not just the few. And so that's kind of the philosophy behind Bitcoin and blockchain. And then, companies like us just are one of many sort of actors, because our view is that movements are bigger than one person or one company. They're about systematic and structural change.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. So, sort of to summarize, I mean, just looking at just at our country, at the U.S., in a fairly short span of time, a couple hundred years, we went from a time when you could, trade goods and services, or, physical gold, coins like that, to a place where if you wanted to even participate in, quote, the American dream, if you will, buy a house or, you know, go out to eat, you were sort of forced into uh, utilizing the large financial institutions, right? You had to have a bank account. You had to have some, I mean, credit cards, some means of allocating or distributing paying people, distribute your resources. And then you had to have somebody to hold on to your resources. And that became, and I think you articulated it well. It's not that there's somebody necessarily breaking the law or somebody doing anything evil or bad, but an infrastructure grows. It is sort of self-fulfilling to the point where it's limiting to certain people. And it isn't about it's about breaking down the infrastructure and allowing people sort of this like free trade or free a way to freely distribute and store their resources without having to participate in this sort of bureaucratic
Yeah,
system.
exactly.
Is that
And so often we'll talk
fair?
about these middlemen that, you question how necessary they are, right? So like whether it's a middleman of a Visa and MasterCard, which might control kind of most of trade in the US. So, my day job, we're kind of focused on changing that, or banking infrastructure that, there's this kind of view of inflation where it's like, if it's only 3%, it's not that bad. It's really bad in like Argentina or something like that, where, over the course of a couple of years, your money's worth nothing. But, if you look at the cost of, housing from the 70s versus the cost of a house now, like it's any wonder why, young people have somewhat lost faith in capitalism and lost faith in the system. It's like, well, if I work with, both parents have to work all their life to barely afford to survive, um, you know, you say maybe inflation is theft, right? And so, um, again, it's not intentional, but the system's not working for you. Versus if you were able to kind of store your capital in a money system that wasn't inflating, but actually was just actually keeping its value and enabled increased purchases of goods and services. There's this notion in technology. The technology itself is actually deflationary. So when my first company that I was involved with started working, the iPhone that we helped kind of build the equipment behind, it maybe stored, I can't remember, a couple hundred photos. It was like a 1 megapixel camera, whatever. Now, 10 years later, or whatever, it stores, whatever, 10,000 photos. It's got a whatever 15 megapixel camera. Like, so for the same amount of money, you can buy more. And this is actually economic abundance. But if that's not happening for normal people in their normal daily lives, actually for the same amount of money, it actually costs them way more, then something's wrong, because technology curve should actually be making that stuff cost less. When you go to Amazon, it's like in some ways magic, right? I can just like order for the click of a button, like anything, and it costs like, a tenth of what it used to cost. So like technology is a deflationary force, but the systems themselves are actually causing things to be more expensive, more costly. And so we just say that is a structural problem with the financial system. That is not actually how innovation is driving our economic system. So
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And I think that inflation and sort of getting outside of a monetary system like the Federal Reserve, whatever. I want to come back to that, but I want to make sure everyone understands and that I understand. You mentioned blockchain, Bitcoin. The way my very limited understanding of, well, let me back up. The question I'm trying to answer, or what I'm trying to explain, is we define sort of the problems with the infrastructure of the banking system. Well, why? How does blockchain solve all of that? My limited understanding is that you the central or the primary point of the banking system or the financial system is there's got to be 100% sort of confidence that there's not, like, if my money actually is there, my money's at Bank of America and I sign online and it says I have X dollars, that money's there, that I can get to it, and that somebody's not going to say, oh, well, somebody transferred it out, or there's security. I'm not explaining it very well, but that blockchain provides a solution to allow for transactions that can always be linked back and followed to. You could always follow the trail or the path, and so it's fully and 100% transparent. And so blockchain, that sort of technology, is a potential alternative because of its transparency. It can't be, it's almost impossible to have fraud because you could trace everything back, and because of that, you could use that as the sort of financial banking system, as opposed to Bank of America. What is it? What are the big
JP
ones now?
Morgan.
JP Morgan
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
case
and
and all that.
I think what you're talking about is a couple of things. One, just sound money. This notion that money should be sound. So like most people don't know, and this is just crazy. So our banks do not store and hold our money. So that's just like this crazy concept. So one of my favorite Christmas movies is It's a Wonderful Life, and there's actually like this um story of actually banking that kind of gets missed in that Christmas movie. But it's at a point where the banks fail and everybody goes to run on the banks and they're like, where's my money? And he's like, the money's not here. And that's because there's something called fractional reserve. So the fractional reserve banking, my money's not sitting there. They basically lend it out. And so, and for a long time they had to hold reserves, but actually today, there's like no reserve requirement, which is crazy. So literally they can lend out. So if I have, I don't know, $10,000 in my bank account, they can loan out all $10,000. Like none of my money are they required to hold. So first, like blockchain, to your point, is highly secure, highly traceable, and then with Bitcoin particularly, it's sound money, meaning that it has to stay there. Like I know where it is, I can track it, I own it, and nobody can mess with it. Well, if you think about that, that allows a higher degree of safety, and then it means that the monetary system is less likely to be corrupted. That's kind of start one. And then what it means is because it's decentralized, because no one owns that blockchain, like Bitcoin is kind of for everyone. The next thing it allows is it allows many, many participants. So if, JP Morgan and Chase and Wells Fargo, and these are all folks we work with, so they're not all bad people, but if they control, so if they're able to take all of our money and then they kind of lend it all out, and they're able to control almost all the money supply, what happens is they wield enormous power. And when you wield enormous power and the systems kind of trend towards monopolies, there's not competition. And if there's not competition, then you can't lower costs. And what technology generally does, and capitalism when it's not corrupt does, is really good ideas come and push against some existing system to lower costs, make things faster, make things more efficient, and ultimately like drive our economic growth. So like at a practical level, so let me describe my day job. So what Paystand does is Paystand works with companies, and so we work with large companies to be able to move money for them. And what large companies today have basically two bad choices. So bad choice one is kind of before the internet, the way they would move money is with like checks, which is crazy. Like you and I haven't used checks in forever, or like wires, which are kind of like expensive and manual. And there's a bunch of reasons why that's super inefficient for a large company. If you're doing, millions of payments, you don't want to be sending millions of wires. Or the alternative that like we kind of use as consumers is something based on Visa and MasterCard. Now, when I go and buy a cup of coffee at Starbucks and I swipe my Apple Pay or whatever, and it goes over Visa, they charge the merchant 3%, kind of on average, sometimes 5%, but let's say 3%. Now, for my $5 cup of coffee, 3%.
The store, not the
Store.
buyer,
Yeah,
the
that's correct.
coffee shop.
Good call. So whoever is the company that's receiving the money is charged 3%. And that is like hard locks, right? So it's kind of like oil prices from the, OPEC in the Middle East. Like it's set. There's no way around it. Okay. So it's like Visa and MasterCard, they collude, they set it every year, and it's effectively 3%, and there's no way to get around. And so for the merchant, again, for $3 cup of coffee or $5 cup of coffee, 3%, whatever. It's not that big of a deal, 10, 15 cents a but my kind of class of customers I work with at Paystand, might be a Motorola or a big manufacturing company, and they're sending, like $100,000 or $1 million invoice with companies they've worked with for years to generate real goods and services, which are economically valuable to our country. And so their choice is either live before the internet or get charged that 3%. And now 3% on $1 million invoice is literally $30,000. Okay. So for the financial system to effectively hold a tax of $30,000 to move money between two companies that like have agreed to pay for each other, know exactly how much money each other has, and has zero risk is like the most insane usury possible. But why? Well, because they effectively have no competition. They own a duopoly on the entire system. They're connected in the 5 major banks, which then are connected in the Federal Reserve. And so again, they can charge that because. And so our view is capitalism can be a force of good. Technology can be a force of good. That economic tax, 3% of all economic commercial activity, which by the way is $18 trillion, is insane. Like let's give that back. Like I consider things, there's two kinds of economies, maker economy and taker economy. So like, let's help make things instead of just like be a tax and a toll charge. And so that's an example of how the financial system kind of unintentionally creates these systems that create complete economic unfairness.
Yeah. So Paystand is an alternative to that sort of the existing or the legacy um, payment options,
Yeah.
right? So tell us a little bit more about Paystand and sort of exactly kind of what it does. Is it facilitating the transfer of money without the
You got
3%?
it, Brandon. So effectively, we're like
Tax?
a modern internet aware next gen payment network for companies. So we work with, large enterprises that are paying other companies, so business to business. And the CFO doesn't want those two bad options, either something super manual and before the internet, or a tax that just doesn't make sense. And so what they use is our system, and our system says, with that thing called the blockchain, which is kind of like the internet for financial infrastructure. It's open, it's free, it's fair. And just like the internet enabled, what we're sitting on a podcast, we can communicate without paying long distance, calling like through AT&T, like in the 90s. Like this call would have cost us, $7 a minute in the 90s. And now the internet, because it's open and free and fair, allows us to be able to have an HD call, with no cost whatsoever. So in the same way, what Bitcoin and blockchain's technology enables is for the free, open movement of money to be instant, completely kind of automated and digital, and with no fees, right? And so, that has a huge economic, impact. And so our company kind of makes that capability usable for large companies. And so we, offer billing services, we offer, invoice services, payment infrastructure, corporate expense cards, all of which will run over our network and all which radically lower our costs for companies. So in our case, we will work with a large, manufacturing companies, what I call the real, goods and services of America. And then we will help them become more economically competitive, which helps them be more competitive on the global scene. Because if we can put that cost back to their bottom line, which oftentimes will save companies millions and millions of dollars, that's kind of a no-brainer for the CFO who we serve with the office of the CFO, but it ultimately is
Yeah,
economic empowerment for the company. And we think ultimately for the GDP of the economy.
I love it. I love it. So is it fair to say that it's sort of is what became known as kind of treasury services at a bank? You guys offer the same sort of benefits and capabilities, but doing it on the blockchain and
Yeah,
utilizing
yeah, yeah. And
Bitcoin.
I think some people kind of say maybe the elevator way people think of it is like we're, the PayPal or Venmo, but for enterprise companies and done on blockchain. So today we have, we've been really blessed. We have about 1 million businesses on platform. So people will say like nobody's using blockchain or nobody's using Bitcoin in the real world other than, maybe to like hedge price or something like that. And we would say, well, we've tens of billions of dollars that would say otherwise. And I think one of our goals in that space was like, I think there's a lot of hype as new technology. So whether it was the internet in the old days or mobile phones or AI now, we wanted to show that there was actually real value in the creation of this technology, as opposed to a lot of people who kind of just look at it as like, a little bit of hype, or they look at it like, you know, um, a speculation. And we want to show like, actually, no, the technology is one of the fundamental sort of, breakthroughs of, our lifetime. And so, and here's how it can be applied, to the economy. So.
I love that. I love that. So I mean, we touched a little bit on inflation, and I don't want to get sort of deep into like monetary policy, but so for those companies, for your customers, and so by the way, in my real job, I run a nationwide land surveying firm, right? So I mean, we face all these challenges, whether it's sort of talking about paying our people or our vendors and receiving payments. So utilizing Paystand, your customers have converted at some point US dollars into Bitcoin. When is that? When does the conversion of dollars into Bitcoin, is that at the time of payment, or do they I mean, how does
Yeah, good
that work
clarification.
exactly?
For the most part, for our customers, they actually never get exposed to it. So one of the like things that our company did was, realize pretty early on that I have friends who built, the public consumer companies in the Bitcoin space that are, burning down the banks directly or whatever, and that's super cool. But like, I can't have that conversation to, whatever a $10 billion Fortune 500 company or whatever we work with. So we enable the technology, so the Bitcoin blockchain that enables all that. But to the company, for the most part, they always just see dollars or pesos or whatever. So, when whatever an Anheuser Busch is trucks are stopping at the bodega to use our applications to do the billing or whatever. The person's just magically wanding money back and forth. For them, it ends up in their Oracle system that they're used to, denominated in dollars, and we just actually use the infrastructure to move it. Um, just like
Gotcha.
people talk about cloud like technologists, but most normal people are like, I don't know what cloud is. It's like, yeah, it's an
Right.
abstraction of internet sort of plumbing, that most people don't need to know what it does and where the servers sit and that sort of
Right.
stuff. So that's what our company's kind of, our magic process is to take all that and abstract it from them. Uh, and there's some cases where we help with cross-border payroll, and you might be paying like a contractor in Argentina, and they actually might prefer Bitcoin or something like that. So there's cases where you might keep
Right.
it in, but for us, 90% of the cases, sort of start and end in fiat money and regular money, and just use our rails, which run over that technology.
Gotcha. 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 And that eliminates the risk of the potential sort of ups and downs or daily value or whatever, because you've limited the
Yeah,
exposure.
to
Well,
point 5 seconds or whatever that we're a network.
right. Okay, I got you. I got you. So you got to forgive me, but that everything just clicked. That I now I now it all makes sense. So it allows people to operate in the sort of exact same world that they always have been, but the back end is utilizing something outside of the traditional legacy infrastructure that's far more uh,
Yeah.
transparent.
Yeah,
We'll
you got
say.
it, Brandon. So, and when you think about it, like going back to the origin story, I think what's exciting for me is, it is a real use case that I think affects real companies, which we think is important to do. Like I'm a believer, mission without impact is just like charity, but I actually think capitalism has this wider ability to have even more change done in the right way. And so, like the day job company, has real value back to real GDP. And then I guess the other thing, that we haven't touched too much on as we kind of get to the tail end of this, is the company also, one of the things I'm really passionate about is I can't talk about financial systems being corrupt and then not sort of, be an example of a better way. And so we have this thing called Paystand.org, which is our philanthropic arm, where we take 10% of our profits and we give it to our philanthropic arm to focus on financial inclusion at the bottom of the pyramid. And so what happens there is kind of like if the core company is this quiet giant, that's sort of changing the unfairness of financial system, the philanthropic arm is a much more front lines thing. And so we are, involved in 40 countries. We work with almost 100,000 kids now, many nation states where we power kind of what's called the Bitcoin circular economy. So these places in El Salvador and Peru and in Africa, where, Bitcoin is being used in these grassroots movements as an alternative to their currency, which is completely unstable and corrupt. So in our case, in the US, the financial system maybe is just not competitive. So we were talking about that in the day job. But if you're in Argentina or, you're in Peru or you're in Africa, and you have inflation rates of 10% and you have no access to banking, which, in many cases, like in El Salvador, where we worked, 70% of people like literally at all, then you never can save, you never can get out of the system, and oftentimes you can be just stuck in usury. And so, there, what we do is we power thousands and thousands of grassroots programs, that are an alternative to their completely broken and corrupt money systems, and we do all that for free. We do grants, we do volunteer work. We send people down. We do sort of matching programs, and so we're one of the quiet powerhouses behind sort of changing sort of economic revolutions in kind of countries all over the world. So that inspires the heck out of me.
Well, it inspires me too. That is, I mean, 10% is a lot. That is a lot. That's a huge commitment. So hats off to you. I don't know how you guys make that work, frankly, but I mean, that's amazing. Um, there's a lot. Yeah. I mean, I have another friend that is sort of in the fintech space, and sort of the unfairness of the world's population that doesn't really have access to a bank. Well, a bank may not be the right way to say it, but to a
Yeah.
financial system, was astonishing to me. He was telling me all about it, and I really didn't recognize or realize why and how that's such a problem. But so you guys are, I mean, you guys are sort of, not sort of, you guys are right at the forefront of pushing the envelope in terms of how the world's financial
Mm.
system works. So what I mean, you're very much sort of a visionary in terms of seeing a different way to do things. What do you think the world's financial system looks like, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, as it compares to
Yeah.
today?
Well, I hope we're a small part of this kind of revolution that is, creating an opt out, and so like the way I think about financial empowerment is you can the way to have quiet revolutions is to have choice, right? And so right now we don't have choice. So whether you're a company and you don't have choice, competitive choice, in the U.S., or you're the pupusa maker in Central America and you're inflationary, and you literally can't get financial services, and so you have nowhere to store your money, and so you get robbed and you just start over. Um, our our view is you have to create an economic system that's more democratic, that creates choice. And so, one stat I was just, I'm traveling right now, but I was just um, in an event down in Central America where we were meeting with the circular economy leaders, that are kind of grassroots movements that are doing these in places all over the global South. And 4 years ago, the El Salvador was kind of the first change, the first place, that started enabling kind of Bitcoin and these other sort of financially democratic infrastructure to be put in place. Um, 2 years ago, it was maybe a dozen places around the world. Last year when I was there, it was 40. And then this year, 400 leaders from all over the global South were there. So 400 communities,
Wow.
that probably are affecting, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess probably in the order of 50 to 100 million people. Um, yeah, that is enormous change. When we talk about fixing the money, like that didn't exist 4 years ago. This technology didn't exist much more than a decade ago. So it's growing. If you look at statistics, it's growing faster than the internet was. So like, the internet was this thing where it kind of grew a little bit under the radar in the 90s. It was sort of like this, den of thieves and, people that were scam artists and whatever in the 90s. And then all of a sudden it kind of got to a tipping point in the late 90s, and it became this thing. And now we're at a tipping point where, think what you might about the current US government and the administration, but we spent enough time with kind of both sides. I would say, 2 years ago, I had to argue with bankers, these big bankers, that like this thing wasn't, a scam or corruption. And in fact, like our company being one of the larger venture funded companies in space, we were debanked. I have long stories about it. We'll probably get hauled in front of Congress about it. Um, Today, you talk to the same, senators and folks at the Fed and otherwise, and they're like, this thing is inevitable, right? Like, strategic reserves that are happening all over the country. We're talking to nation state leaders constantly. Like it's kind of this thing that's like slowly, all at once. We are at a tipping point now. And so Bitcoin and blockchain aren't this, thing that's just this scary, you know, uh, exactly.
Fad.
What you find is it's now part of the financial infrastructure of the globe, and it's growing faster than the internet. So you can only imagine what that means from 10 years from now.
Yeah. So just really quickly, we're getting ready to push up on time here. So what does that mean for an individual, like day-to-day lives? What, like, can you help? Can you paint the picture for an individual that, you know, I don't know, goes and buys a cup of coffee or buys a house or something? How does that look different from the way we do it today?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's different for different people. So, if you're somebody in the US or that has stable money, probably what it means is like today, just in Bitcoin use, there's maybe 100 million sort of people that store and hold Bitcoin as a store of value, meaning a fight against deflation. That's long term savings. I think probably for them the simple way to think of it is it's a 401k that like I don't think about what my 401k price is day to day, but over time it's going to be a accumulating asset the way my house might go up and down in price, but over time so just like my parents tried to store their value and have upward mobility in the house and property. Today, Bitcoin um, is the digital asset of long-term value because it's hard money.
Mhm.
It's enabled because it actually has real use cases. So it's not just speculation, but companies like us actually use it. So the more companies like us create alternatives to Visa and MasterCard, the more that asset becomes valuable, right? Just like, the more you improve a house, your house becomes valuable. And so I think for that contingent, like the first step is just to think of it as a long-term store of value, which has a lot of use just in itself. And then for companies and people, in my world, it's actually really powerful technology that can be used within a company to make the companies more efficient, AP payroll, to do cross-border transactions, whatever. And then if you're, if you're in philanthropy and in the global south, it is literally life changing. Like you do not have freedom without economic freedom. And so, I think Bitcoin is different things to different people. But it is economically transformational to all contingents, just in different ways.
I love it. And as soon as I asked that question, I realized it was sort of an ignorant question because I think what you guys have done is you have enabled the utilization of Bitcoin and the blockchain on a global scale or level, but done it in a way where it doesn't make a
Yeah.
practical difference to the business. And so if I were going to answer my own question, it would be nothing. Well, and I'm being super like, you know, Amerocentric and ignorant. But I'm talking about like in terms of thinking about how it impacts like walking around day to day based on what you guys have done at the business level. It sounds like it will sort of feel and work and operate similarly. The technology that is powering it in the background, if you're wise enough to opt out, will uh, facilitate sort of operating in the world as it is today, but utilizing the better sort of back
Yeah,
end engine, if
there's
you
a
will.
kind of trait saying that technology becomes magic when it stops being visible. That's true. Yeah.
Gotcha. I love it. I love it. Gosh, faster than the internet. Well, so I've got like 2 minutes, and I promise I'll let you go. But so two final questions. One of them is sort of trite and cliche, but it always elicits a really interesting answer. If you got a chance to go back um, to the Jeremy that was walking sort of through the Occupy Wall Street movement, and you had a minute or 5 minutes to sit with that Jeremy um, and tell him something, what do you think you would tell him based on your this crazy journey that you're on?
I think calling's so important for all of us, right? Like where where are we skilled at, and like where do we feel like we have a personal like we will run through walls for? And so, I think that was a moment for me where it was like I was skilled in technology and financial services, and I had this moment, um, that just personally made me mad, right? Like it moved my emotions. And so, I think those are defining moments. And so, like, I think for anyone in the audience, you know, um, I talk to young entrepreneurs a lot, and sometimes they'll want to build a cool company or make a lot of money or whatever. And I think like, that's great. Um, but really look for the moments like that moment for me. And I don't think I would have necessarily recognized that was the moment for me. But like, I know what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I don't, my board knows that. Like, I have a fiduciary job as the company is now, significant size and scale. But, um, like they know I don't care about money, power, or fame at this point. Like for me, like the mission and the impact, and drive for change, like, I'll do that for free. Like I literally would just show up if they fired me and just keep doing what I do. Because it goes a lot deeper. And I think when you find that, like you have this kind of like infinite energy inside of you because you're doing what you were made to do. So
Yeah. I love that. I love that. It's like, I find very similarly, you can't, it sort of boils down to what it is you're chasing, right? If you're chasing money or chasing fame or fortune or power or whatever, it's elusive. It's elusive. But if you're if you're chasing something that you're passionate about that makes a difference, then the fame, power, money, whatever, that's a sort of a product that just ends up happening on your chase. Well, I love your passion and your vision and your sort of dedication to your mission. I think it's inspiring to me, and congratulations on building one hell of a company that sounds like you guys are just
I
getting
appreciate it,
started.
Brandon. It's always fun to talk to like-minded people, man. So, if I'm a big believer, like movements and like, change happens, by like-minded people, being together, trying to push the ball forward. And so, we're just one player, and I hope, I tell our team every day, it's, every one of the people, so, that we build at the company, and as the company gets bigger and scale and will be a public company at some point in the near future, like, all of that is just because we're playing our part, and that is motivating. So just to share our journey with you, Brandon, has been super, super inspiring. I appreciate the time, brother.
Yeah. The pleasure is ours for sure. Is there anything else if you wanted to tell the internet something? Is there anything that we didn't touch on? I mean, there's a million things we didn't touch on, but is there something you were hoping we would talk about, or anything else that you want to
I'm
mention?
terrible at shameless plugs, but somebody probably on my site will give me a hard time if I don't. Um, so I think
Please,
so
please.
if you're a business and are interested in like modernizing your financial stack and saving a bunch of money, just go to paystand.com. If you are interested in our philanthropic efforts, on financial inclusion, you can go to paystand.org. And then if you're interested in kind of like, my ramblings on, sort of the financial system and economic empowerment and Bitcoin and blockchain, you can find me on Twitter at Jeremy Almond. And, I'm trying, Brandon, to get my hat at learning what you do. We have this small little podcast where we bring on, executives and policymakers that are working in the Bitcoin blockchain space. And that's called Redefined, the Redefined pod that we do with a VC friend of mine that we'll bring on kind of really interesting guests. So it's always interesting to learn from friends like you, man. So
I love it. I love it. I love it. So you guys heard of, so paystand.com, paystand.org, at Jeremy Almond on Twitter. And then say the name of the podcast one more time. Redefined?
Yeah.
Redefined. All right. Well, we'll look out for that for sure. I'm going to put that on my my favorites, and I'm going to check
brother.
you out.
It's always good to share time and break bread with you, man.
For sure. Likewise, Jeremy. Have an awesome day. Safe travels getting back. All right. Talk soon.
Don't forget, everybody, you can find Boundary Breakers in a lot of places. You can watch our episodes on the Boundary Breakers YouTube channel, or you can listen to each podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any of the other major podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.